My name is Laurel, and I was 31 years old the morning my father told me I would embarrass the family at my sister's wedding. Not that I wasn't welcome. Not that plans had changed. Just that my presence, my specific, particular presence, would be a problem in front of the people who mattered that day. His exact words were, "You'll embarrass us in front of the Aldersons." Said it flat, like he was reading a weather report.
No softening.
No pause after. Just that, and then silence on the other end of the phone while I stood in my kitchen holding a mug that had gone cold. I didn't argue. I asked one question, whether he'd like me to cancel, and he laughed. Actually laughed. What my father didn't know, what nobody in that family had thought to check, was that 14 vendor agreements for that wedding had one name on them. One account attached. One person who had quietly, methodically paid $61,000 to make sure my sister had the day she always described to me when we were kids sharing a bedroom. That person was me. I want to tell you what happened when the Aldersons asked to see the booking confirmation. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. New stories drop every week, and the comments are full of people who've been exactly where Laurel is standing. I need to start a little before the phone call because the phone call only makes sense if you understand who I was in that family and who I was not. I grew up third of 4 children in a mid-sized house in Claremont, Ohio. My parents, Dennis and Roberta, had built their lives around a particular idea of respectability. Not wealth, we were never wealthy, but the appearance of it. The right neighborhood, the right church pew, the right friends. My father worked in municipal permitting for most of my childhood, and my mother ran the front office at a dental practice until her knees gave her trouble.
They were not bad people.
I want to say that plainly. They were people who had decided somewhere along the way that how things looked mattered more than how things were. And I had spent my entire childhood being the one who disrupted the look. Not intentionally. I was quiet, actually. Bookish. I preferred the back of the room to the front, preferred a handled problem to an announced one. But I was also direct in a way that made my mother nervous. I said what I thought. I asked clarifying questions in situations where everyone else had agreed to pretend things were fine. At family dinners, I was the one who noticed the number didn't add up, or that someone had said 2 contradictory things in the same breath, and I made the mistake, repeatedly, of saying so out loud. My sister Danielle was 3 years younger and made entirely of light, as far as my family was concerned. She was warm, she was social, she had the easy charm that gets people elected to things. She laughed at the right moments. She deflected tension with a smile so natural, it didn't look like deflection at all. My parents adored her without reservation, in the way parents sometimes adore a child who reflects their own best hopes back at them. I understood that. I didn't resent Danielle for it. We were close, genuinely close, in the way sisters can be when one of them is the favorite and the other one has made her peace with that. My brother Marcus was the oldest and largely absent. He'd moved to Portland for work years earlier and appeared at holidays with the distant goodwill of someone fulfilling an obligation. My younger brother Cole was still living near our parents, working at a landscaping company and largely uninterested in family dynamics unless they affected him directly. I had left Ohio at 22 for a logistics coordination role with a freight management company, the kind of work that requires a brain for systems and a tolerance for tedious precision. I was very good at it. Over 9 years, I had worked my way into a senior contracts role, managing vendor agreements and procurement cycles for distribution networks across the Midwest. The work was invisible to everyone outside of it. When I explained it at family gatherings, my mother's eyes glazed over politely, and my father changed the subject. What the work did, practically, was pay well. Not extravagantly. I wasn't driving anything flashy or living anywhere that would turn heads. But I had saved carefully, invested quietly, and arrived at 31 with a financial stability that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew my situation. I lived below what I could afford. That was a choice I'd made early and kept. My apartment in Indianapolis was clean and comfortable and cost less than I could justify spending. I drove a 7-year-old Subaru. I brought my lunch to work 4 days out of 5. I kept a spreadsheet. I always kept a spreadsheet, and I knew exactly what I had, exactly what I owed, and exactly what I could commit to at any given moment. My family had no clear picture of any of this. I had never corrected their assumption that I was doing fine, but not spectacularly. It wasn't deception. It was just that money was not something we discussed directly in my family. What was discussed constantly and elaborately was what things cost when other people were paying for them. The person who understood me or came closest was my Aunt Georgia. Georgia was my father's older sister, 74 years old at the time of these events, and she was the kind of woman who had arrived at her age by outlasting several things that should have broken her. She'd been widowed at 51, raised 2 sons largely alone after that, and had spent her later decades with the particular clarity of someone who had stopped performing and simply started being. She kept a house in Milford, 40 minutes from my parents, and she made a sour cream pound cake every Christmas that I have never once tasted anywhere else. Georgia and I talked on the phone every few weeks. She asked real questions and listened to the answers. She knew what I did for work and why it suited me. She knew I had money set aside and that I didn't broadcast it. She had, in her quiet way, been the one to suggest, 2 years before the events of this story, that if I was going to help Danielle with the wedding, I should make sure the paperwork was clean. Not because anything will go wrong, Georgia had said, in the unhurried way she said most things. Just because clean paperwork is always cleaner than messy paperwork. I had thought about that a lot afterward. Danielle got engaged to a man named Trevor Alderson on a Thursday evening in late October, 14 months before the wedding. Trevor was 34, an account director at a mid-sized marketing firm, pleasant and genuinely kind in ways that I respected. His family was from Westfield, well-established, not showy about it, the kind of people who drove sensible cars and had very good manners and owned things in a quiet, generational way that required no announcement. My parents met the Aldersons at a dinner in November and came home changed. That's the only word for it. My mother called me 2 days later, and the register of her voice was different, careful in a new way, measuring each word.
The Aldersons were lovely, she said.
Just lovely. The father, Robert, had been a district court judge before his retirement. The mother, Patricia, sat on 2 nonprofit boards. They had a lake house in Michigan. I remember listening to my mother describe that dinner and feeling something I couldn't quite name at the time. Something like a low hum of warning. Danielle called me separately, excited and a little overwhelmed, and we talked for an hour about everything she wanted. A spring wedding, not too large, maybe 120 guests, flowers everywhere, a venue that felt like a garden, a dress she'd already bookmarked 17 versions of. She was 28 and glowing with plans, and I was happy for her. I asked what budget she and Trevor were working with, and she went quiet in a way that told me the answer before she gave it. Mom and Dad said they'd help, but you know how they are with money lately. And Trevor's parents have offered, but Trev doesn't want to start the whole thing feeling like they owe them. So we're kind of figuring it out. I knew what figuring it out meant for Danielle. It meant stress she would absorb privately and not show, and a wedding that came out smaller and more compromised than the one she described to me in that bedroom we shared when we were 9 and 12, cutting pictures from magazines. I told her I wanted to help, that I could cover the vendors if she handled the personal costs, the dress, the honeymoon, the things that were just theirs. She cried a little, which she doesn't do easily. I told her to send me every contract before she signed anything.
She did.
Every single one. I reviewed 14 agreements over the following 11 months. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the photographer and videographer, the band, the lighting company, the rental equipment, the transportation, the cake designer, 2 separate day of coordinators, the rehearsal dinner space, and a specialty linen vendor my mother had insisted on after seeing a photo online. I negotiated 3 of the contracts myself, flagged ambiguous cancellation clauses in 2 others, and arranged payment schedules that drew from a dedicated account I set up specifically for the wedding. My name was on every agreement as the contracting party. My account was the one on file for all deposits and final balances. The total committed, across 14 vendors, was $61,240. I had it. It was not a stretch. I had told Danielle this clearly, and she had accepted it with a gratitude so enormous it occasionally made me uncomfortable. Our parents knew I was helping in a general way. Danielle had told them I was contributing. what she had not conveyed because she genuinely didn't think it was relevant. I believe that was the scope of it. My father seemed to understand that I had paid for some things. I don't think he understood that I had paid for all of the things. This is important because it means what he did next wasn't malicious calculation. It was the ordinary carelessness of a man who had always slightly underestimated one of his children and had stopped double-checking that assumption years ago. The call came on a Wednesday morning, for weeks before the wedding. I was at my desk, a contract review open on my second monitor. My phone showed my father's name, and I answered without thinking.
Laurel.
That was how he started. Not hello.
Dad.
What's going on? We need to talk about the wedding. A pause. Specifically about you being there. Something shifted in my chest. Not dramatically, more like a gear catching wrong. What about me being there? It's just, Patricia Aldersons said something to your mother at the venue walkthrough. About how she'd heard you could be a little blunt with people.
Direct.
And with 120 guests, a lot of them people we don't know well. Who told Patricia Alderson I was blunt? That's not really the point, Laurel. I think it might be the point. A breath on his end. The point is that Danielle's wedding day needs to go smoothly, and your mother, and I think it would be better, just easier if you weren't there. At the ceremony and reception. You could come to the rehearsal dinner. We're not saying. You're telling me not to come to my sister's wedding. We're saying it would help everyone if you just gave them this one day. Without any complications. I was quiet for a moment. My hand had gone flat on my desk. There was a very still quality to the room. You'll embarrass us in front of the Aldersons, he said, and his voice had the tone of a man explaining something obvious. That's just the truth of it, Laurel. I know that's hard to hear. Is Danielle part of this conversation? A pause that told me everything. Your mother, and I thought it was better to talk to you directly. I see. Another beat. Would you like me to cancel?
He laughed.
It was short and a little incredulous. The laugh of someone who thinks the other person is being dramatic for effect. Cancel what, Laurel? The vendors. Another laugh, smaller. You don't need to be like that about it. I'm not being like anything. I'm asking a question. We'll talk about this later. I just wanted to give you a heads up. And he ended the call. I sat with the phone face down on my desk for about 3 minutes. My jaw had tightened in a way I recognized, the physical thing that happened when I was processing something I hadn't been given time to prepare for. My shoulders had pulled in slightly. I did not call Danielle. Not that day and not the next. I needed to understand what she knew before I said anything that couldn't be unsaid. I called Georgia instead. Georgia listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was one of the great gifts of talking to her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Is Danielle going to call you? She said. I don't know. Maybe. And the contracts are all yours? Every one. Georgia made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Then you're holding more cards than he knows. The question is what you want to do with them. I don't know yet. That's fine. You don't have to know yet. Danielle called on Friday, 2 days after my father. Her voice had the texture of someone who had been crying but had stopped and was hoping the evidence wasn't audible. She said she'd found out about the conversation. She said she was horrified, that she'd told our parents they were completely out of line, that she wanted me there more than almost anyone. She said she was sorry. I believed her. I do still. I'm not going to make this harder for you, I told her. But I need you to understand what's actually happening logistically. All of the vendor contracts, all 14 of them, are in my name. My account is what's on file. If I'm not there as a guest, I need to think carefully about whether I'm able to stay on as the contracting party. A silence. What does that mean practically? It means that if something needs a signature or a payment authorization or a change order, the vendors are going to call me. Not Mom.
Not you. Me.
I could hear her absorbing this. But you wouldn't actually. You'd still want the wedding to happen, Danielle. I said it gently. I want you to have the wedding you planned. I'm just telling you what the paperwork says. Your parents may not fully understand the paperwork. She said she would talk to them again. I told her to let me know how it went. She called back Sunday evening. Our father had not changed his position. Our mother had, characteristically, said she thought the whole thing was unfortunate, but that she trusted Dennis to handle it. Danielle was in tears again. She told me she didn't know what to do. "You don't have to do anything," I said. "I'll handle it." The wedding was on a Saturday in the last week of April at a restored estate venue outside of Carmel, Indiana, called Whitmore Gardens. It seated up to 200, had a greenhouse-style pavilion for the ceremony and a converted carriage house for the reception, and cost accordingly. I had reviewed and signed the venue contract 11 months earlier. My name was on the primary lease. My payment had covered the deposit, the balance, and the event insurance rider. I had made a decision in the week leading up to the wedding. I would be there. Not because I was making a point, or not only because of that, but because Danielle had called me 4 more times in the final 10 days, and each time she called she sounded more like someone trying to hold too many things at once without dropping any of them. I had helped plan this wedding. My name was on the building they were standing in. I was going to be present. I did not announce this. I did not call my father back. I texted Danielle on the Friday night before and told her I'd see her in the morning. She replied, "Please come." I drove to Carmel on a clear April morning with a small rolling garment bag and arrived at Whitmore Gardens at 9:45, an hour before the ceremony. The venue's events director, a composed woman in her 50s named Carol Hensley, met me at the entrance. She knew me well by that point. We had been in contact regularly throughout the planning process, and she had my number listed in her event file as the primary contract holder. Laurel. She greeted me with the particular warmth of someone who had navigated complicated family logistics before. "Everything is on track. The florist finished at 9, the caterer is set up in the carriage house, and the band has done a sound check. We do have a couple of items that need your authorization before 11. "Of course," I said. "Let's go through them." We reviewed 2 items, a small change order from the caterer for a dietary substitution, and a final timing confirmation with the lighting company, and I signed both in the venue's small administrative office. Carol thanked me and walked me toward the greenhouse pavilion. The guests hadn't arrived yet. The setup crew was making final adjustments to the chairs. The florist's arrangements, cream peonies and trailing greenery, exactly what Danielle had described wanting, were at every aisle end, and the light through the glass ceiling was the pale gold of late morning. It was genuinely beautiful. I stood at the back of the pavilion for a moment and thought, this is what $61,000 looks like when it's working. My mother saw me from across the room first. She went still in the way of someone whose calculation had just changed. She said my name once, quietly, and then my father turned. His expression moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, then something tighter, then the careful blankness of a man recalibrating. He started across the room toward me. I didn't move. "Laurel." His voice had the quality of a man trying to keep something contained. "We talked about this." "You talked," I said. I listened. "This isn't the time." "I'm not making it a time for anything, Dad. I'm a guest at a wedding." He looked at me for a moment, then at the room, then back at me. He said, "I just hope you'll be considerate of the Aldersons," I finished. "I know." And then Danielle appeared from the side room where the bridal party was assembling, and she saw me, and the expression on her face was such a specific combination of relief and gratitude that something in my chest loosened. She crossed the room and hugged me, without saying anything for a moment. "You're here," she said. "I'm here." My father stepped back. My mother found something to look at across the room. The reception moved to the carriage house at 12:30. Round tables with the cream linens my mother had selected, a bar my parents had not paid for, a buffet arranged by a caterer my name was on the contract with, flowers my account had funded. The band began their first set as guests found their seats. I was placed, by my parents' arrangement, at a table near the back, with 2 of Danielle's college friends I'd met twice, and an older couple from the Aldersons side whose names I didn't yet know. This was fine. I was there. That was the thing that mattered. Robert and Patricia Alderson were at the head table with the wedding party. I had observed them during the ceremony. Robert was tall with a judge's controlled stillness. Patricia was the kind of woman who had probably never not known what to do in a social situation. They were warm with Trevor and Danielle. They greeted my parents with the gracious ease of people who know they're the more significant family at the table and are trying not to make it obvious. It was about 40 minutes into the reception. The first round of toasts had been given. The meal was underway, when Robert Alderson pushed back from the head table and made his way toward the bar with the unhurried confidence of a man who had presided over rooms his entire professional life. He stopped at my table on the way back. "You're Danielle's sister," he said. Not a question. He'd clearly been told. "Laurel." "That's right." I stood slightly. "Robert, it's a pleasure to meet you." He had a handshake that matched his bearing, direct, not performative. He looked at me with the focused attention of someone who made it a habit to actually see who he was talking to. "Patricia and I were hoping to find you," he said. "We understand you were involved in pulling the day together." He smiled, and it was a genuine smile rather than a social one. "Quite significantly involved, we're told." I glanced, I couldn't help it, toward the head table, where Patricia Alderson was watching our conversation. Then toward my parents' table, where my father had gone very still. "I helped where I could," I said. Robert tilted his head slightly, in the way of a man who had heard careful understatement for 40 years and recognized it easily. "Patricia would like to say hello. And forgive the logistics in the middle of a party. She had a question about the event booking, something the venue mentioned. Would you mind?" I walked with Robert Alderson to the head table. Patricia stood as I approached, which was not something I'd expected, and she took my hand in both of hers with the warmth of someone who had decided something. "Laurel," she said, "I've been wanting to meet you properly since the rehearsal dinner." "Likewise," I said. "Congratulations on your son." She smiled. "He chose well." A pause, then. "I'm sorry. I have what probably seems like a strange question, and I hope you'll forgive the timing. Carol Hensley mentioned something when we arrived about the venue booking and Robert, and I just wanted to make sure we understood the situation correctly. She said that all of the event contracts for today were held under your name." I heard my father's chair move behind me. I didn't turn. "That's correct," I said. "All of them." Patricia's voice was measured, not unkind, the voice of a woman who had sat on nonprofit boards and knew how to ask a direct question without making it aggressive. 14 vendor agreements," I said. "The venue, catering, florals, photography, the band, lighting, transportation, all of it. My name is on each contract as the primary party. My account is what the deposits and balances were charged to." The table had gone quiet in the way that tables go quiet when people realize a conversation is happening that they need to pay attention to. Trevor and Danielle were both looking at me now. Robert had settled into the chair beside Patricia with the stillness of a man who had just received information that confirmed something he'd suspected. "And your parents," Patricia said carefully, "were aware of this?" "They were aware I was contributing to the wedding," I said. "I'm not sure the scope was fully communicated." It was a precise sentence, and I had measured it. Not an accusation, just a fact. At the table to my left, I could feel rather than see my father. The air had a particular quality. My mother had her hand on the tablecloth in front of her, fingers flat, as if she was studying something. Carol Hensley appeared at the edge of the group. She had been making a round of the reception space, and she had the alert attention of a professional who recognized the shape of the moment. She came to stand beside me with the naturalness of someone answering a question that hadn't been asked yet. "Mrs. Alderson," she said, "I can pull the event file if it would be helpful. It has the complete vendor list and the contracting party on each agreement." She looked at me. "Is that all right, Laurel?" "Of course," I said. Carol stepped aside to retrieve a folder from the venue's portable admin station, the kind they kept at large events for exactly these moments. She returned in under 2 minutes and opened it on the table with the calm efficiency of someone for whom this was simply an administrative matter. The event summary sheet was on top. It was organized by vendor category, with the contracting party listed on each line. 14 rows. 14 times. In the column marked primary contract holder, my name. Robert Alderson looked at it for a moment, then looked up at me. Something shifted in his expression, a kind of recalibration, quiet and unhurried. "You funded your sister's entire wedding," he said. It wasn't a question. I wanted her to have the day she wanted. Patricia looked at the sheet for a longer moment. Then she looked across the room at my parents. Then back at me. She did not say anything for a beat. Then, We were told at the rehearsal dinner actually that you might not be attending today. That it had been decided it would be simpler. I heard that too, I said. A silence. My father had not moved. My mother's hand was still flat on the tablecloth. Who decided that? Trevor said, and his voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before. Quiet, but with something beneath it. No one answered him immediately. Danielle set her fork down. The small clink of it on the plate was the loudest sound at the table for a moment. She looked at our parents.
Mom.
Dad. Her voice was soft, but there was no give in it. I'd like to understand this too. My father cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice had the careful register of a man trying to manage several things at once. We had a conversation, your mother and I, about the day running smoothly. That's all. Without telling Danielle? Robert said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. We thought. Without telling the person who paid for all of it. Trevor said. My father looked at me. There was something in his face that I hadn't seen there before in my direction. Not remorse exactly, but a kind of recalibration, slow and visible. The laugh on the phone 4 weeks ago had been the easy laugh of a man who believed himself to be holding more than he was. He understood now what he had actually been holding. Carol closed the event folder quietly and stepped back. Patricia Alderson reached across the table and put her hand briefly on mine.
Thank you, she said.
For this. She gestured slightly at the room, the flowers, the linens, the light. It's a beautiful day. You made it beautiful. I said thank you. My voice was steady. I looked at Danielle, who was looking at me with her eyes very bright, and I said, I'm glad I'm here. The rest of the reception had the particular quality of an afternoon that has shifted on its axis and is trying to continue as if it hasn't. The band played. The cake was cut. Guests danced on the small floor in the center of the carriage house. From the outside, from the perspective of any guest who had not been sitting near the head table, it was a lovely April wedding proceeding exactly as lovely April weddings do. For my parents, and specifically for my father, it was something else entirely. Robert Alderson had returned to the head table, but the easy hospitality of his bearing had a new quality to it, not hostile, but sober. He made conversation with the people around him, smiled at the right moments, fulfilled the role of a gracious father of the groom. But when his eyes moved across the room, they moved past my father without the particular warmth that had characterized the earlier part of the evening. Patricia was warmer by nature and more deliberate in how she deployed that warmth. Over the next hour, I noticed her having 3 separate conversations, with Trevor, with Danielle, and at one point with an older woman from the Alderson side who appeared to be a family matriarch of some standing. I couldn't hear any of these conversations. I didn't need to. The shape of them was visible from where I sat. My Aunt Georgia had been seated at a table midway through the room. She was too far to have heard the conversation at the head table directly, but she saw the aftermath with the clear eyes of a woman who had been reading rooms for 74 years. She caught my gaze from across the carriage house and gave the smallest nod, the nod of someone who has been quietly right about something and doesn't need to announce it. My father came to find me an hour into the reception. He stood at my table with a plate he wasn't eating from and a posture I'd never seen on him before, slightly reduced, like a man standing in a space that had become smaller than he'd measured. Laurel. He said my name and then stopped. I waited. The Aldersons, he started again. Robert said something to me. About the contracts. I imagine he did. A pause. The muscles in his jaw moved. I didn't realize, I thought you were helping with some of it. I didn't know it was everything. It was everything, I said. I know that now. He set the plate on the edge of the table. I didn't handle the conversation, the call I made, I didn't handle that well. I looked at him for a moment. My father was not a man who found this kind of sentence easy. I could see the effort it was taking him, and I wanted to be fair to that. But fair didn't mean pretending the phone call hadn't happened, or the laugh at the end of it. No, I said. You didn't. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry for what I said. I let that sit for a moment. I know, I said finally. He picked up the plate and walked back toward my mother's table. I watched him go. My mother came 20 minutes later, more efficiently than my father, with the brisk energy of a woman who needed the discomfort resolved. She sat across from me, without waiting to be invited. "Your father told me he apologized," she said. "He did. I should have said something when he called you. I should have pushed back." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She was quiet for a moment. "Patricia Alderson asked me if you were involved in any other family events. If you coordinated things like this regularly." She looked at her hands. I think she was making a point. "Probably," I said. It was embarrassing. I looked at her.
Mom.
"You told Dad it was fine to call, and tell me not to come to my own sister's wedding. That embarrassed you." Her lips pressed together. She didn't disagree. "What do you want me to say, Laurel?" "Nothing specific," I said. "I just want you to understand what actually happened." She left shortly after that, and I watched my parents navigate the remainder of the reception with the careful attention of people who understood that their standing with the Alderson family had shifted in a way that couldn't be unshifted. Robert and Patricia were not cold to them. They were too gracious for that. But the particular warmth of people who consider you respectable had been replaced by the more measured warmth of people being polite at their son's wedding. My father understood the difference. I watched him understand it. Trevor found me near the end of the reception, when the band was on their last set and several of the older guests had begun their careful departures. He stood beside me for a moment before he spoke. "Danielle told me," he said. "Everything. The full scope." He shook his head slightly. "I didn't. We should have checked the paperwork ourselves. I should have known who was holding what." "It wasn't your job to check," I said. "I offered to help. Danielle and I had a clear arrangement." Still, he looked at me with a directness I respected. "Thank you for making sure it happened, and for being here." "She's my sister," I said. It was the only answer that covered it. Danielle and I found 10 minutes alone near the end of the night, outside the carriage house in the pale early evening air. She still had her dress on, veil gone now, and she looked like someone who had been in a beautiful storm all day and had come out of it intact. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you'd actually canceled," she said. "I know. I didn't tell them the full amount. I should have. I thought it didn't matter, that it was just between us." "It was just between us," I said. "Until it wasn't." She looked at me. "Are you okay?" I thought about the question. "Yeah," I said. "I am." In the weeks following the wedding, several things settled into their new positions. Patricia Alderson called me 10 days after, my personal cell, which Danielle had provided, to invite me to a dinner at the Alderson family's home in Westfield. It was a small gathering, she said, immediate family only. She wanted me there. I said yes. The dinner was quietly illuminating. I liked Robert and Patricia. I liked Trevor's sister Cecilia and her husband. I liked the easy conversation of people who were secure enough not to perform. Patricia asked me about my work with the specificity of someone who had actually looked up what logistics contract management involved, and we talked for an hour about procurement systems in a way that nobody in my family of origin had ever wanted to. At one point, Robert said, in his measured way, that Trevor had mentioned the wedding contracts, and that he wanted me to know he considered what I'd done. Not just the funding, but the care of the paperwork, the vendor management, the whole coordinated effort. Genuinely impressive. "Your family is lucky to have you," he said. I said thank you, and meant it. My father called me the following month. He had a specific purpose. My parents wanted to take a family trip to Lake Erie for the 4th of July, a tradition that had lapsed for several years, and he was calling to invite me. His voice had a quality it hadn't had in years when he spoke to me, something more careful, more attentive to how the words were landing. I said I would think about it. I did think about it. I went. It was not a transformed family. My mother still had the nervous need for appearances. My father still sometimes defaulted to the path of least resistance when managing someone else's opinion of us. These were not things that one conversation at a wedding reception fixed. But there was something different in how my father spoke to me after Carmel, a slight adjustment in his bearing, the way you adjust to the actual dimensions of a room after you've been navigating it by the dimensions you assumed. He never laughed like that again, at least not at me. That was not nothing. Danielle and Trevor bought a house 8 months later, a brick colonial in a suburb north of Indianapolis. Danielle asked if I wanted to come with her to the walkthrough, and I did. We stood in the empty kitchen, sun on the counters, and she said she'd been thinking about how to thank me, not for the wedding, but for the whole of it. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "I want to. I keep thinking about that phone call Dad made. And you didn't blow anything up. You didn't threaten anyone. You just showed up." "I had clean paperwork," I said. She laughed, really laughed, the way she did when we were kids. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Aunt George's advice," I said. She shook her head. "I'm going to make her a pound cake. She'd like that." Here is what I took from all of it, and I've thought about it enough to say it plainly. The people who dismiss you are usually not accounting for what you're actually carrying. They see what you present, and if you present quietly, they assume quietly means small. They build their calculations on that assumption, and they stop checking whether it's accurate. My father did not call me to be cruel. He called me because he had stopped updating his understanding of who I was, and cruelty is easier than calculation when you haven't bothered to do the math. He assumed I could be subtracted without a remainder. The remainder was $61,000 and 14 signed agreements. Clean paperwork is always cleaner than messy paperwork. I have my Aunt George's voice in my head every time I sign a contract, and I think I will for the rest of my life. That's my story. A phone call I didn't expect, a folder Carol Hensley opened on a reception table, and the particular silence of a room when a number lands in a way that can't be walked back. I want to ask you something before I go, because the comments on this channel are always full of people who have been in some version of this room, and I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, if you had funded something significant for someone you loved, and the people who were supposed to be on your side told you to disappear before the moment arrived, would you have shown up anyway? Or would you have let the paperwork speak without you in the room? There's no wrong answer. I want to know what you would have done. Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.